The most expensive mistake I ever made cost exactly one fire emoji. It was a little after midnight when I made it. I was lying across my couch in a tiny Brooklyn apartment, wearing oversized pajamas, half watching a cooking show, and scrolling through my phone the way millions of people do when they cannot sleep. Outside my window, New York glowed beneath a cold winter sky. Inside, the only light came from a lamp in the corner and the blue glow of my screen. I remember yawning. I remember telling myself I should go to bed. Then I remember seeing his photo. Vincent Moretti. Even if you pretended not to know his name, you knew his face. Every news outlet seemed obsessed with him. Every business magazine called him a genius. Every gossip site called him mysterious. He rarely smiled. He rarely gave interviews. And somehow that only made people more interested. The photo showed him standing on a rooftop overlooking Manhattan. Black coat. Snow falling around him. City lights behind him. It looked less like a photograph and more like a movie poster. I shook my head and laughed quietly to myself. Okay, that is actually a good picture. I meant to keep scrolling. Instead, my thumb slipped. A tiny flame appeared beneath the photo. For a second I stared at the screen. Then my stomach dropped. No. I had accidentally reacted with a fire emoji. I immediately sat upright. My blanket slid to the floor. Seriously, Emily? I muttered. My face felt hot even though I was completely alone. I tapped the screen frantically, trying to undo it. The application lagged. Then refreshed. Then froze. Perfect. Exactly what I needed. I groaned and dropped my head back against the couch cushion. Out of millions of profiles online, I had accidentally reacted to the one belonging to the most intimidating man in New York. Not that it mattered. Why would it matter? He probably received thousands of reactions every hour. He would never notice mine. I laughed nervously and tossed my phone onto the coffee table. Problem solved. Or so I thought. Less than 30 seconds later, the phone buzzed. Once. Then again. Then a third time. My eyes narrowed. Nobody texted me this late except my best friend, and she was on vacation in Florida. I reached for the phone. The screen lit up. My heartbeat stopped. A notification appeared across the top. Someone had viewed my profile. I blinked. Then looked again. Vincent Moretti had viewed my profile. The room suddenly felt very quiet. I stared at the screen so long the display dimmed. My pulse hammered inside my ears. There had to be another explanation. A glitch. A fake account. Some random coincidence. Yet his verified badge sat there beside his name like proof that reality had decided to become ridiculous. Outside, snow began drifting past my apartment window. Inside, another notification appeared. This one made my breath catch completely, because it was not a profile view. It was a message request. And before I could even decide whether to open it, 3 sharp knocks echoed from somewhere beyond my apartment door. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the doorknob, every instinct in my body screaming that this was insane, yet I could not stop myself. The knocking came again, firm and deliberate, echoing through the narrow hallway of my apartment, the sound almost theatrical against the quiet hum of the city outside. Snowflakes drifting lazily past the window, illuminated by the golden glow of streetlights. I took a deep breath, steeling myself before opening the door. And there he was, Vincent Moretti, standing tall in a long black coat, the snow dusting his hair, eyes dark and unreadable, scanning the room with a sharp intensity that made my heart stutter. And yet he smiled faintly, a curve of lips that seemed both amused and dangerous, his presence instantly filling the small apartment like a storm rolling in. And I realized that despite all the warnings, the stories, the myths surrounding him, this was real, undeniably real, and the air between us charged with the unspoken tension. Of countless possibilities, I tried to form words to explain, to apologize for a single emoji that had triggered this improbable visit, yet none came, leaving only silence thick enough to touch. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, the soft crunch of his shoes on the wooden floor grounding the moment. In an almost intimate reality, and then he spoke, voice smooth, deep, carrying authority yet oddly gentle. "You have no idea what you just did." And I shivered despite the warmth of my sweater, feeling the weight of the situation pressing in, a mix of fear, curiosity, and an inexplicable thrill. I sank onto the edge of the couch, clutching the blanket to my chest as he approached, surveying my tiny apartment with a calculating gaze. as if measuring every inch, every object for meaning, and, finally resting his eyes on me, full of that strange intensity that made it impossible to look away. And in that moment, I understood that nothing about tonight would be ordinary, that a single careless reaction had opened a door into a world I had only glimpsed in headlines and whispers, a world both dangerous and undeniably magnetic, the kind of world where decisions mattered, consequences loomed, and yet there was a pull I could not resist, a silent invitation to follow where he led. And as he finally stopped near the window, backlit by the falling snow, I could feel the electricity in the room, the unspoken promise of a story unfolding between us that would not allow retreat, and I realized that everything I thought I knew about boundaries, control, and chance was about to be rewritten in the quiet, impossible magic of this unexpected encounter. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. The silence felt almost unreal, stretched tight between the glow of my apartment lamp and the snow-covered city beyond the window. Vincent stood near the glass, one hand resting casually inside the pocket of his coat, studying me with a level of focus that made me feel like the only person in New York. I hated how aware I suddenly became of everything. My messy hair, the half-finished cup of tea on the coffee table, the blanket wrapped around my shoulders, the fact that one of the most talked about men in the country was standing in my living room because I had accidentally touched the wrong button on my phone. "You still have not explained what I did," I finally said. Vincent smiled slightly. "That is because you think this started tonight." His answer immediately made my stomach tighten. "What does that mean?" Instead of answering, he pulled out his phone and looked down at the screen. The glow reflected across his face before he turned it toward me. "Tell me something," he said calmly. "Do you believe in coincidence?" I frowned. Not when someone shows up at my apartment 10 minutes after a social media reaction. That earned a quiet laugh from him. It was the first genuinely human thing I had seen since he arrived. Not intimidating. Not calculated. Just real. Then he placed the phone on the coffee table between us. My eyes dropped toward the screen. At first I did not understand what I was looking at. It appeared to be an old photograph. The image quality was poor, the colors faded with age. Several people stood together at what looked like a summer gathering. Families. Children. Folding chairs. A bright afternoon somewhere far from the city. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Vincent did not answer immediately. Instead he watched my face carefully. "Look closer." I leaned forward. The photograph filled the screen. My eyes moved across unfamiliar faces until they suddenly stopped. My breath caught. I recognized one of them instantly. A young woman standing near the center of the image. Blonde hair. Bright smile. A face I had not seen in years but could never forget. My mother. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "How do you have this?" I whispered. Vincent's expression changed. For the first time since arriving, the confidence faded from his eyes. Something deeper appeared. Something almost vulnerable. Because my family was there that day. I looked again. My pulse accelerated. Standing only a few feet away from my mother in the photograph was a dark-haired boy, perhaps 10 years old. Even through the grainy image I recognized him immediately. Vincent. The apartment suddenly felt smaller. The city noises outside disappeared. Every logical explanation I had built inside my head collapsed at once. This was no longer about a fire emoji. No longer about a late-night social media mistake. Somehow, impossibly, our lives had crossed long before either of us remembered. And as I stared at the photograph, Vincent quietly said the words that changed everything. "Emily, I have been trying to find you for years." The words settled over the room like falling snow, quiet and impossible at the same time. I stared at Vincent, searching his face for any sign that this was some elaborate joke, some misunderstanding that would suddenly make sense if I waited long enough. But there was nothing playful in his expression, nothing uncertain. He looked like a man carrying a truth he had been holding for years. My eyes drifted back to the photograph resting on the coffee table. My mother stood frozen in time, smiling beneath a bright summer sky, completely unaware that decades later her daughter would be sitting in a Brooklyn apartment at 1 o'clock in the morning trying to understand why one of the most powerful men in New York knew who she was. "Years," I repeated quietly. "You have been looking for me for years?" Vincent nodded once. The apartment suddenly felt too warm, too small. I stood and walked toward the kitchen, more to clear my thoughts than for any real purpose. The hardwood floor creaked beneath my feet. Behind me, Vincent remained exactly where he was, giving me space. Somehow that made the situation even stranger. Everything I knew about him suggested control, confidence, command. Yet tonight he seemed careful, almost cautious. I grabbed a glass from the cabinet and filled it with water. My reflection stared back at me from the dark kitchen window. Wide eyes, confused expression. A woman whose life had apparently become connected to a mystery she never knew existed. Why? I finally asked. Why would you spend years looking for someone you do not even know? The room fell silent. When Vincent spoke again, his voice was softer than before. Because your mother saved my family. I turned around so quickly that water splashed onto the countertop. Vincent looked down briefly at the photograph before meeting my eyes again. When I was 10 years old, my father lost almost everything. My family was going through a difficult time. Most people walked away. Your mother did not. His voice carried a rare sincerity that immediately caught my attention. She helped us when she had no reason to. She never asked for anything in return. The pieces still did not fit together. That was decades ago. I know. And you have been looking for me because of that? He smiled sadly. Not at first. That answer made my pulse quicken. Snow continued drifting outside the window. The city had become quiet. Even the traffic seemed distant now. Vincent leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. Several years ago, I learned your mother had passed away. The words hit harder than I expected. No matter how much time had passed, hearing it spoken aloud still hurt. Vincent continued carefully. Before she died, she left something with a lawyer. A letter. My heart skipped. A letter. He nodded. A letter addressed to me. Every thought inside my head seemed to stop at once. Vincent reached into the inside pocket of his coat. Slowly, deliberately. Then he placed an old sealed envelope onto the coffee table between us. My name was written across the front in handwriting I recognized instantly. The handwriting of my mother. And suddenly I realized this story had never been about a fire emoji at all. My hands would not move for several seconds. The envelope sat on the coffee table between us like something fragile and sacred, untouched by time while everything else around it had changed. I recognized my mother's handwriting instantly. The elegant curves of each letter. The way she always crossed her capital letters. The tiny details that years could never erase. My throat tightened. Vincent remained silent. He did not rush me. He did not explain further. The city outside continued its quiet rhythm beneath falling snow, while my entire world seemed suspended inside a single moment. Slowly, I reached forward and picked up the envelope. The paper felt older than it looked. Carefully preserved. Protected. Waiting. My name stared back at me from the front. Emily Carter. Written by a woman I had not heard from in years except through memories. 1,000 questions raced through my mind. Why had she written to Vincent? Why had he kept it all this time? Why had she wanted me to receive it now? My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the seal. Inside was a folded letter. The paper crackled softly as I unfolded it. The familiar handwriting filled the page. Suddenly I was not sitting inside my apartment anymore. I was 12 years old again, sitting beside my mother on a summer afternoon while she helped me with homework at the kitchen table. Tears blurred my vision. I blinked them away and began reading. The first line stole the air from my lungs. If you are reading this, it means Vincent finally found you. I looked up immediately. Vincent was watching me quietly from across the room. There was no surprise in his expression. Only patience. Only understanding. I lowered my eyes back to the page. Your life may seem ordinary right now, but there are things I never told you. Not because I wanted secrets. Because I wanted you to have a normal childhood. My heartbeat accelerated. Every sentence pulled me deeper. The letter described a friendship between my mother and Vincent's family years before I was born. Difficult times. Shared struggles. Promises made between people trying to protect one another. Then came the part that changed everything. There was a photograph enclosed behind the final page. I carefully pulled it free. It showed my mother standing beside a young couple. The woman smiled at the camera. The man held a small dark-haired boy in his arms. Vincent. I stared at the image in disbelief. On the back, my mother's handwriting appeared once again. Family is not always created by blood. Sometimes it begins with a promise. I looked up from the photograph. The apartment suddenly felt different. Smaller somehow. More intimate. The mystery that had started with a single accidental tap was becoming something far larger than coincidence. Vincent leaned forward slightly. Your mother asked me to find you when the time was right, he said quietly. I spent years trying. Outside, snow continued drifting across the city. Inside, I realized that the impossible story unfolding around me had begun long before either of us knew it. And for the first time since he arrived at my door, I was no longer afraid of Vincent Moretti. I was afraid of discovering just how connected our lives had always been. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, painting stripes across the apartment floor, yet I could not focus on the light or the quiet street below. My mind was consumed with thoughts of the letter and the photograph that Vincent had entrusted to me the night before. Each detail replayed in my head, the words my mother had written echoing as if the room itself whispered them back to me. I paced slowly, each step measured, careful not to let the emotions tip into chaos. Vincent remained in the living room, silent, his presence a steady anchor amidst my storm of questions. Finally, I sank onto the couch, the photograph still in my hands, studying every detail as though closer inspection would unlock hidden truths. Vincent walked over and sat beside me, careful not to crowd my space. You have a right to know everything, he said softly, his voice calm, deliberate, and yet carrying weight that made me hold my breath. I looked up, meeting his eyes, searching for hints of deception, but found only honesty and restraint. He unfolded a folder, revealing documents, old receipts and photographs spanning years of connection between his family and mine. My heart raced as I pieced together the timeline. My mother's silent arrangements, the careful orchestration to ensure I was protected, the subtle guidance that had led Vincent to be there when I needed him most. I ran my fingers over a photograph of him as a young man, smiling, an image of innocence I had never associated with the Mafia boss in my mind. He explained without pressure that my mother and his family had made promises long ago, creating bonds of trust and protection, unseen but unwavering. I listened, absorbing every word, understanding the depth of planning, the careful layering of events that had kept me safe. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the secrets unraveling within this small apartment. The snow had started again, gentle flakes drifting, a calm contrast to the revelations inside. I felt a strange comfort, a recognition that the world could hold such intricate, protective networks, that people could care and plan for you without your knowledge. Vincent handed me another document, a simple note from my mother, yet the handwriting carried warmth, concern, and love. She wanted you to be ready, he said, his eyes locking with mine, and for the first time, I understood the full extent of what had been orchestrated, the meticulous planning of my safety and discovery. I nodded slowly, the weight of gratitude and understanding filling me. The snow continued to fall outside, and inside, I felt a bridge forming between past and present, between trust earned and the unfolding story that connected my family and Vincent in ways I could never have imagined. This was not just coincidence or chance. It was carefully laid paths converging, leading me to knowledge, clarity, and a sense of belonging that had been missing. I took a deep breath, feeling the snowlight on my face through the window, the warmth of Vincent's presence beside me, and realized that the story that had begun with a single photograph and a letter was now taking shape into a future I could approach with newfound confidence and understanding. The evening air carried a chill that contrasted sharply with the warmth inside the apartment, where I sat across from Vincent, feeling a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. You never cease to surprise me, I whispered, almost to myself, my eyes scanning the room for distractions while my mind raced to catch up with the revelations that had unfolded over the past few days. Vincent watched me closely, calm and composed, yet there was an intensity in his gaze that made me acutely aware of the shared history and unspoken connection between us. He leaned forward slightly, resting an arm on the table, his presence commanding yet comforting, a balance that had taken years to perfect. I unfolded a piece of paper, a letter that had arrived just that morning, the handwriting unmistakably familiar, carrying with it the weight of personal history, secrets kept and truths finally revealed. As I read aloud, my voice trembling with emotion, Vincent listened, nodding subtly, encouraging me to continue without interruption. The contents of the letter detailed arrangements made long ago, promises between families, and the meticulous planning that had ensured I was safe and guided without knowing. Outside, the city lights flickered against the winter sky, casting soft reflections into the room, and creating an intimate backdrop for the conversation that was simultaneously revealing and cathartic. I paused, taking in the gravity of the moment, the realization that each choice, each action taken by Vincent and my family, had been interconnected, leading to this precise moment of understanding. He reached across the table, lightly touching my hand, an act of reassurance and connection, his eyes meeting mine in silent acknowledgement of trust and shared experience. The snow continued to fall, a gentle reminder of the quiet world outside, while the room remained filled with the gravity of familial bonds, trust, and the careful orchestration of events designed to protect and guide. I felt a deepening sense of respect, not only for Vincent's unwavering commitment to safeguarding me, but also for the intricate web of care that had been woven over the years. The conversation shifted naturally from the contents of the letter to memories, reflections, and the unfolding realization that the past had shaped the present in profound ways. We spoke of hope, resilience, and the unexpected ways life could align circumstances for protection and revelation. As the night deepened, the room seemed to pulse with quiet intensity, a mix of revelation, understanding, and the recognition that the connection between us was not merely coincidental but a carefully constructed support, a bond built on foresight, loyalty, and the unspoken promise of guidance. The evening drew to a close with a newfound sense of clarity, the weight of hidden truths lifted, leaving space for gratitude, trust, and the cautious optimism of a future informed by knowledge, understanding, and the subtle, enduring power of human connection. The next morning arrived quietly, the pale winter sunlight streaming through the tall windows, illuminating the room where I sat with Vincent across from me, both of us processing the events of the previous night with careful consideration. "I never expected it to unfold this way," I murmured, tracing the edge of my coffee cup, the warmth contrasting with the chill in the air outside, my thoughts racing to understand the layers of intention, planning, and subtle guidance that had shaped the moments leading up to our reunion. Vincent nodded, his expression calm yet attentive, eyes following every subtle movement I made, reading the unspoken words that hovered between us. We spoke of timing, of coincidences that were never really coincidences, and of the careful orchestration that had allowed us to cross paths at precisely the right moment, a delicate balance of chance and design. Outside, the streets glistened with frost, and the occasional passerby moved quickly, unaware of the quiet intensity inside the apartment, where memories, unspoken emotions, and revelations intertwined seamlessly with the morning light. Vincent's voice was measured, grounding, reminding me of the stability and security that had always underpinned his actions, the quiet reassurance that even in moments of surprise, there was purpose and protection. I listened, absorbing the meticulous thought behind each decision, understanding the complexity of human connection and trust that had led to this very instant. The conversation drifted naturally to reflections on past misunderstandings, the moments of tension and relief, and the subtle ways in which each of us had influenced the other's decisions without fully realizing it at the time. The room seemed to contract with focus, a microcosm of shared experience and contemplation, every glance, pause, and gesture imbued with meaning and mutual respect. I felt the weight of gratitude and the quiet acknowledgement that life's intricate patterns often hid profound truths until the right moment revealed them. As we continued to speak, laughter occasionally broke the solemnity, a gentle reminder of resilience, adaptation, and the shared history that had brought us to this point. The morning stretched on, each minute layered with significance, a fusion of understanding, recognition, and the beginnings of a future informed by clarity and trust. In that soft, golden light, the world outside faded to a gentle blur, leaving only the immediacy of connection, the realization that even subtle actions could lead to transformative outcomes and that the bond between us, carefully nurtured and tested, was resilient, profound, and quietly unbreakable. The dialogue carried on, revealing nuances, emotional depth, and insights that only time, observation, and reflection could provide, creating a space where comprehension and acceptance coexisted with anticipation, leaving both of us poised at the threshold of a day that promised understanding, reconciliation, and a sense of shared purpose that had long been awaiting recognition. The evening unfolded with a calmness that belied the intensity of the day, the soft glow of the streetlights casting gentle shadows across the quiet neighborhood as I walked alongside Vincent, each step deliberate, measured, and filled with unspoken understanding, our conversation drifting effortlessly from recollections of past moments to contemplations of the future, the crisp winter air carrying the faint scent of pine and distant fires, reminding us that even in stillness there is life, warmth and subtle excitement. It is remarkable how timing works, I said, my voice quiet yet carrying conviction, and Vincent's gaze met mine with a calm intensity that spoke of awareness, protection, and attentiveness, acknowledging the shared understanding that had formed between us over years of unforeseen events and carefully navigated choices. We paused by a small park, the bare trees outlined against the darkening sky, their branches tracing delicate patterns that mirrored the complexity of our own intertwined paths. And as we reflected on the surprises, challenges, and delicate decisions that had led to this night, a sense of quiet resolution settled over us, an appreciation for clarity, mutual respect, and the recognition that life's twists often bring revelations when least expected. The conversation turned to future possibilities, dreams tempered by realism, and the unspoken agreements that govern human connection, each word, gesture, and pause carrying weight and significance, a tapestry of meaning woven through attention, empathy, and presence. We shared laughter at subtle recollections, brief yet illuminating flashes of humor and humanity that softened the gravity of reflection, and I realized how much trust, patience, and understanding underpinned every interaction, every shared glance, and the space between sentences, highlighting the delicate balance of influence, support, and insight that characterized our relationship. Vincent's expression, steady and observant, offered reassurance that while the world outside was vast and unpredictable, the microcosm of this evening, our dialogue, and our attentiveness to each other created a sphere of safety, clarity, and mutual appreciation, a sanctuary in which the complexities of life could be acknowledged, processed, and integrated into a coherent understanding of self, relationship, and circumstance. As the night deepened, the ambient sounds of distant cars, faint laughter, and the occasional gust of wind provided a gentle rhythm to our reflections, grounding us in the present moment while simultaneously connecting past choices to current insights and anticipated paths. The quiet harmony, the balance of thought and feeling, the shared comprehension of subtle gestures, and the reaffirmation of mutual care allowed a profound sense of conclusion to settle over the evening, a resolution that was less about finality and more about recognition, appreciation, and readiness to move forward together with awareness, connection, and a renewed commitment to the intricate, sometimes unpredictable, but deeply meaningful journey we share.